Hello and welcome to the Service-Based Business Society podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany-Ann Bottcher. I left the corporate world to build my own businesses, and along the way, I've learned that scaling isn't all highlight reels. It's messy, it's hard, and it's totally worth it. As a mom of three, the author of The Data-Driven Method, and a serial entrepreneur, I know firsthand what it takes to build something bigger than yourself. This show is where we get real about entrepreneurship. The good, the bad, the beautiful, and yes, even the ugly. Each week, I'll pull back the curtain to share stories, lessons, and strategies that help ambitious entrepreneurs scale their success. So let's get started. You've got the vision, the big ideas, the entrepreneurial fire, but here's the truth bomb nobody talks about. Most businesses don't fail because of bad ideas. They fail because of bad operations. Today's guest is Lisi Kempton, also known as the Mindful COO, and she's here to tell you why you might be quietly sabotaging your own success. We're diving deep into the 7 biggest mistakes business owners make when scaling, from running a $200,000 business without even a bank account, yes, really, to burning out doing work you hate in a business you built for freedom. Lisi breaks down the difference between being a visionary CEO and an integrator COO, and why trying to be both might be what's keeping you stuck. If you've ever felt like you're fighting fires instead of building an empire, or you're making good money but working yourself to the ground, this episode is your wake-up call. We're talking budgets, team structures, systems that scale, and why awareness is your first step to massive growth. Plus, Lisi shares the tangible steps you can take today to stop overlooking the operational gaps that are costing you time, money, and sanity. Welcome to the show, Lisi.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
I feel like operations is the often kind of underestimated mystery piece to the success of businesses. And I find that people either love operations, they don't really consider it a big piece, or they know that it needs to be an important part and they just realize that's not their strength. I find that operations is really that kind of piece that takes a great idea, a great financial concept, and then takes it into something that can truly scale. I was just so excited for
That's
what
cool.
we
A
were
lot of
going to
people
talk
don't
about
get
today.
excited about operations, just like you said.
No, that's not the first time that someone said to me, people don't usually get excited. I'm also the number nerd. And so, I often get excited about certain things, but, I think unless someone is interested in operations or they feel the pain of having operational problems, then they aren't always, out there digging into, what operational pieces their business needs. So many people start their business journey being like, I want to be the CEO. Very few people are like, I want to be the COO, but it's
So
so
true.
important.
Yes. And if they want to be the CEO, they should not be the COO for sure. Yeah.
Yes. So my challenge actually in starting my business, I've kind of talked about it, is I always leaned more into the operations than the CEO. And I would say that to this date, I still at times like I would prefer to be the COO than the CEO of my business. And people always laugh. They're like, no, you need to be. I'm like, I get it. But it really is 2 different mindsets. And those who are really good at being a CEO are typically not as good at being a COO. So why don't we kind of dive into a little bit?
And EOS, if anybody knows, real operating system, and the books that have been, there's a couple books that have been written like Traction, and now the other one is slipping my mind, but they really talk about the difference between the CEO, which they call the visionary, and the COO, which they call the integrator. So the CEO comes up with the big ideas, they have the big vision, and then the COO really brings the vision to life and implements the vision and makes sure that it happens. So that's the distinct difference. And they actually even have a little tool that you can use to test whether you should really be the CEO or whether you should really be the COO. And it also helps you identify somebody else who's the other piece of that puzzle. Helps you identify who could be, who would be that best other fit for you based on where you land. That's really the difference.
Yeah, one of the things it's interesting because there are very distinct hats. And one of the things I kind of talk to our clients about is, if you kind of go back to old fashioned business, if you think kind of a bunch of people sitting around a boardroom, there was, you had like
Mhm.
your person from legal and your person from HR and your person from accounting and operations and all these things. And so a decision would come in and it would go around the table. And the problem is when business owners are starting out, they are all of those people. And so oftentimes we get almost in our own way because we have really our own, we have this great idea, we have this amazing piece, we want to implement, we want to go ahead and do. But then, the other part, maybe the more operation side or the finance is like, whoa, 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 we can't really do that. And then, it's because we're not really getting those different conflicting it's really
Yeah.
all coming
I
from
mean,
one
that's true.
person.
When you're a solopreneur and you're just starting out, you have to wear all those hats. And maybe, you have a CPA or a bookkeeper that comes in and helps you with your finances. You probably have a virtual assistant to start. You should, hopefully you can get somebody helping you right away. And as your business grows and you start, getting to the multiple six and want to scale beyond that to the seven figures or more, you have to start looking at your business like that in departments. Really, like I have a marketing department, I have an operations department, I have a sales department. And can you outsource? How much of that can you outsource and still, be maintain financial integrity? You certainly don't want to, spend all your money on all of your resources, but that's why you have to have a budget. you know, you have to have somebody helping you manage that so that you can identify where you can spend money and how much and when.
Yes, it's interesting. So obviously we're on the kind of more finance side of things, and we, help business owners setting up things like budgets and that type of thing. And the amount of business owners that have run
Mhm.
for a very long time with no budget at all is shocking to me, truly still shocking to me, because oftentimes you almost kind of have this kind of predisposition to like, well, this person, the business owner must have a budget because,
Oh
and
yeah.
but still so
Yeah, I've
many
worked with
haven't.
plenty of business owners making $250,000 or more a year, and they don't even have a business bank account. They don't have a business entity. They don't have all of those, legal and financial things in place that help them avoid those pitfalls. And what happens, and you know this to be true as well, that sometimes it takes them getting into trouble before they, really understand
Mhm.
the importance of those components and why they need to have them in place.
Business owners, and I say this within I was trying to explain this. We had someone new on our team that was kind of on that administrative side, and they were struggling with how often we were kind of changing. I was changing between priorities, and so it was like this seems super important until something else seemed more important. And they were like, how do we know when we were? And so I was, when someone asks a question that sometimes you kind of automatically, it takes that moment to kind of reflect and say, well, how do we decide that? Like, I just automatically decide. So how do we? And we were breaking that down. And I said, being, business ownership really is sometimes
Mm,
about fighting the biggest fire. And sometimes there is another fire that's kind of smoldering over in the corner, and it's there and that it's not out, but unfortunately that has to a little bit go on the shelf while we deal with something else. And there's always kind of these changing priorities. But I think that really does
mm.
come back to pain. People often won't reach out for operational support until they really feel like something is broken, something is now really hurting, their operations, their day to day. We see it often with, people hiring bookkeeping support. I'll have a call with a business owner and they'll be like, "Oh, this is super important. I need to get this going." And it sounds like a great call and no problem. And you think, "Okay, we should get started on that." You feel positive at the end of the call and then you don't hear anything. And I've learned, like, sometimes those business owners come around
Mhm.
even 6 months later and say, "Hey, I didn't sign with anyone else. I really liked you. We knew we wanted to start with you, got busy on something else, and then I got another letter from the CRA, the IRS, whoever, and suddenly this became more pain. Like, this actually is now like a real problem, and we need to get started last week, preferably, and, like, we need this done by the end of the month." And so, it really is that kind of, you know, sometimes it's that kind of defensive rather than offensive because something is broken, things are a little bit scattered, and so now it's a matter of
Yeah, I
kind of
mean, and I
cleaning
think
things
that's
up.
the important message that I'm trying to convey with my business. I've been doing this for really over like 30 years in business, but over 20 working with entrepreneurs and helping them scale. And it's to try to avoid the problems down the road. Like, I really want to educate business owners as early as possible in their business expansion process, whether it's five figures to six, six to six, and whatever. Whatever. If you're scaling, you should try to do it. And that's why I have the mindful COO, like try to do it strategically, mindfully, intentionally. Those three words they all mean the same thing to me. Strategically, mindfully, intentionally, like try to plan where you're going and avoid those challenges because they just cause so many problems and costs so much money. That's the problem. And I would start working with these seven-figure business owners, and they would pay me a lot of money to fix their problems that we could have been avoided in some part, if they would have looked at it earlier in their business. So I think that that's a key message to get across, for your clients as well as mine. Like, try to look at it before it becomes a problem, before it becomes an issue, if you possibly can.
Yes, absolutely. What would you say are some of the, and obviously it's very specific
Mhm.
to where people are in their business journey, but those who are maybe, really trying to get to the, let's start with kind of six-figure mark. Maybe they're hovering right around the six-figure mark. What are some of those first kind of, let's call, shimmers of operational issue that should be the red flag that
Well, I have
people
a
should be
framework
jumping
that I
on?
created that actually addresses that at any business level, but it's going to be different depending upon where they're at. So
Right.
I would say that they always should be looking at protecting themselves from burnout. I've learned that the hard way. Other entrepreneurs that I've worked with have as well. If you don't take time for wellness, you'll be forced to take time for illness, that kind of thing. And so really looking at themselves, like, how can they protect themselves and how can they make sure that they're focused on doing as much of the work that lights them up and brings them joy as possible and outsourcing the rest as much as possible. Then you have all the financial stuff. Like, to me, any business that's getting started should have a budget, and they should have their things in an accounting tool like, QuickBooks, and they should be using those things regularly, and they should have a bookkeeper and a CPA that's helping them with that stuff. So this is all the things that I'm saying are going to be true for the level that you just mentioned, the six-figure level. I think they should be starting to think about, their finances and running their business like a real business, really is what this comes down to. And then they should look at the legal stuff. They should have contracts in place for their programs that they have, the clients that they're working with, any affiliate partnerships that they have. People are overlooking the legal documents they need to have in place in their website, terms of use, terms of service, privacy policies. Cybersecurity isn't a problem, whether you're a five-figure business, six-figure business, seven-figure business, or beyond. You need to have a cybersecurity plan in place. My website got hacked. It got taken down. They just have bots out there now that are, trolling the internet and taking out, websites just for fun, which is horrible. And then you have all this, strategic planning. Like, you should have a strategic plan in place. You should be, trying to run your business more from goals versus just reacting to your inbox and the structure. So, talking about the operational infrastructure, you should have some systems and tools, and it'll be different depending upon what level of business you're at, but you need to reevaluate that at every stage of growth too. Do you have the right systems in place for managing your business and to support you where you want to go? Do you have standard operating procedures? Are you documenting those things? So there's a lot that goes into that structure component. And then the last one is team. Do you have the right team? And it'll be different depending upon where you're at in your growth. Do you have the right team to help you get to your next stage of growth? So my framework I developed over working with all six-figure startup founders, Fortune 500 companies, six-figure entrepreneurs, seven-figure entrepreneurs. Like, really the framework is the same, but it depends on where you're at and change slightly based on what their goals are and where they're at in their business today.
Right. Right. Yeah, I find that, growing people, if we want to, team members that can really step into roles that can help alleviate things at like a middle management level, any kind of leadership role is not typically someone you're going to be able to hire and put in that role,
Yeah.
you know, tomorrow. Even if you're hiring someone that's super experienced, chances are your business has some kind of nuances that make it unique. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be doing very well because businesses have some kind of piece that make them unique. you know, eh, Really being able to lay
Mm,
out your growth plan and know what people you're going to need and when, or have some ideas. It's never your plans are never going to be exact, but knowing, hey, we're going to need to hire that person probably next year, you know, how much is that person going to cost? What kind of training is that person going to need so that we can at least, I always
yeah.
say knowledge is power. And so knowing those things ahead of time, or knowing what is that next piece, whether that's a bookkeeper, a social media manager, new tech, doing the research to know what investment are you looking at so that you can start to plan as to how that kind of ties into
Yeah, for
things
sure.
can
I
be
mean,
really
that's where
important.
the budget, like you were saying, comes in, the importance of that. You can map those things out. And then if you even get more creative with the cash flow statement, then you can see, how you can work those into your business or financial model, you can work all of those things into your business. You can play around with those numbers, as you know, to see where you can eventually plug that in based on projected, income and revenue streams. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So, when you're coming into a business and looking at some of these operational, do you usually start with some kind of audit, or are you really leaning on the business owner to say, "Hey, this is what's bothering me. Can we fix this problem specifically?" Or do you take a kind of a more whole
Yeah, I
company
do rely
approach?
for sure on the feedback that I get from the business owner. They're going to have some, pain points and symptoms that they're experiencing, so they will share those. But I always take a whole business approach. I have that framework. I do an audit for sure across the entire business because what I've learned is that you can't just scale one part of your business. You can't just scale sales. I think that people get stuck with that too. It's like, oh, I want to make more money. I just need to generate more leads and revenue, and then they don't look at the rest of the business to make sure it can support that growth and expansion. So it's a disservice to them if I only look at one component of their business. You really have to look at every, like I said, department. Even though they don't think they have departments, they really, do, and they have to look at every department in their business to make sure that it is scalable. So definitely start with an audit, feedback from the business owner and an audit for sure to figure out where to go from there.
Yeah, there's often one piece, that kind of expression, the chain is
Mm,
only as strong as its weakest link. And you can have, your marketing dialed in, and you could have, you can have all of these different, but whichever piece has the lowest capacity ultimately will be the piece that restricts everything else. And so, if that's delivery, you only have so many people that can deliver. Well, that's going to be the challenge that needs to be solved. If you have only so much cash flow, and you have really restricted credit facilities, and then that's going to potentially be the part that causes the restriction. And so really identifying what that is and how it's going to affect things and whatnot can really be a key piece to deciding how much. Because I mean, the number of times I get on a call with someone and says, I want to scale, everything, and so people say, I want to
really?
do $1 billion. And I had this one conversation with this business owner not that while ago, and I laughed because I said, how many, it was a very joking kind of call. I wouldn't typically, and I said, how many zeros is in a billion? And she was like, I don't know. I just want all of them. And it was like that very like, hey, I have a vision, but like
No
didn't really have
plan.
any of the pieces yet on what we needed to actually do that. And so now I kind of joke and laugh all the time about, if you want to do $1 billion, you best
Yeah.
know how many zeros are in that number, because
And
it's a
people
lot.
forget there's only limited number of hours in the day, right? If you're a service-based company and you're relying on yourself delivering all of that, yeah, you can't work 24 hours a day or 30, sometimes they think they can work 20, 36 or 48 hours in a day. It's like, no, you're limited to that. And so
Totally.
that's an interesting exercise to go through too, is what's your current offering and how many can you actually sell and deliver, and then how much, that's your revenue ceiling right there. People forget there's a ceiling, and you got to do something creative to
Mhm.
get around that, like group, how can you scale your offers? Becomes a conversation.
Absolutely. The other thing that we really you kind of see is people building their business and plans based on what
Mhm.
the sale price of their offer is, not the profit on the offer. And people are like, oh, well, we're doing, like $100,000. And it's like, and then they're looking at,
Mhm.
perhaps buying a new truck as well. A lot of people like to their first big purchase to be a new vehicle. And you think, but how many of those do we need to
Mhm.
sell in order for the profit to actually pay the truck payment? And when you start to really break that down, then oftentimes, especially with, you see a lot of increasing in interest costs right now, carrying costs. And a lot of times, we're seeing across a lot of industries that people are
Oh
just slower
yeah.
to pay. So they're carrying, a higher accounts receivable balance. So then they might be paying a little more on credit card interest, line of credit interest, those types of things. And so that's just negatively affecting cash
Yeah,
flow
that's
overall.
so true. I mean, I think business owners forget about that stuff, which is fine. They just need to hire the people to pay attention to those things. Like
Totally.
you paying attention to finances, I pay attention to operations. Like they need to recognize that that is an important thing to still pay attention to, even if they don't understand it. And if they don't want to do it, that's fine. But they should find somebody that does want to and can.
Yes. So you've been doing
Mhm.
operations for a long, long time. And so there's been some obviously different shifts, different kind of time periods almost in resources available to business owners. And I would say right now we are at a time where there is more available to business owners than ever before. And super exciting times that all of that is available, but also almost overwhelming to be trying to keep up, like keeping up with
Yeah.
the
Yes.
AI Joneses, if you will. And where should there be, it's almost every software. I talked about it a few episodes ago with someone. I said almost every software now has some kind of like,
Mhm.
we've added AI component, whether that's some kind of AI summary, and so in some regards, it's very exciting. In other instances, it almost opens up. One of the softwares we use within our firm added AI, and I saw just last week, there's this big announcement, hey, we've added AI. And, in the Facebook group on the weekend, you've got a whole bunch of people who are using the software saying, hey, before this launches, can we get some information on where that information goes? Is there a security risk? Like, I have these things I have to be compliant with. And so people, and the general thing was what started as people being super excited was like, hang on, this actually is a potential liability. I didn't go back to the message to find out but it was worth reviewing at this point, at least. And so it was like a big time thing now that people weren't expecting. So super exciting, lots going on. I love staying on the front foot on the innovation and whatnot. But where would you say people are running into things, whether that's just taking up so much time evaluating or just getting lost in all of
There
the
are so
offerings?
when we're talking specifically about AI, it is overwhelming because I'm following it pretty closely and I'm in these groups. I found a couple of people that I trust that I'm following that are doing the research for me, luckily, because you could go down rabbit holes all day there. And well, one day they're like, this is the
Yes.
best tool. You guys should use this. And then the next day it's a completely different one for the same thing. They're like, oh, this one's even better. So again, a six-figure business owner is not going to be able to afford to pay somebody to manage, follow all of this. So it's really the ones that are making a little bit more that can afford to hire somebody that can keep their finger on that pulse. Otherwise you will just get lost and spend all day. I think that a good place to start for anybody, I say, is the customer journey because those are really the key areas of a business that you can, use AI and automate. And I think you'll get the most bang for your buck. And that means like, the lead generation system, the onboarding system, the sales system, the onboarding system, and then the delivery system. And then even after that's like, how can you delight them so that they're so excited and they stay with you and then refer business to you. So really that what I just mentioned is the whole customer journey. And that's a good place to start. There's tools that help you build a landing page really easily and a PDF, lead magnet, if that's where you're at in your business. And you can get those done pretty quickly using AI tools. And there's a lot of them, out there to choose from. So just find out, you might have to experiment with a couple and find out what works best for you. So I think that Trying trying to maybe find so for somebody that can't afford to pay somebody to do that, I would find a group that you trust, somebody you rely on, and don't try to keep up with everybody. Don't try to keep up with the AI Joneses. Like, just follow the 1 or 2 people that you trust and just rely on them to tell you what to do, because otherwise you could literally spend all day just trying to keep up with it. Oh,
It's
yeah.
a bit of a rabbit hole. I've been working on, I follow Stephen Pope on YouTube. I've loved his automation stuff for a very long time. And so I joined his school community a few months ago. And they have some great like templates, and then you build it. And so I'm going along, and I was kind of following this one, and then all of a sudden a new video came out, and it was like, oh, I think that replaces that. And then it was like and then I was like, okay. And then I'm like, "Oh my goodness." I actually got on one of
Yeah.
their, like, office hour calls, and I was like, "Hey, like, I have, like, this built, like,
Mhm.
3 versions of this built, like, to, like, 90%, and then I keep switching, and so I'm just trying to decide, like, which of these versions I should finish because, like, all seem to do the job, but what are the big differences?" Because it's like, just because it's newer doesn't necessarily mean perhaps that it is better. It could just be a different variation because there are
So
so
many
many
tools.
tools
Yeah,
now.
it's kind of stressful, I think, right now. It's like you said, it's a good time and it's also a confusing and stressful time, I think, to try to figure it all out.
Yes. So when business owners are trying to, I think when I think of ops, I really think about kind of like that business operational system, whenever that, and most times that's going to involve some kind of
Hmm.
tech. So, when business owners are deciding, hey, it feels messy, there's some kind of pain, it's not, the system's not working very well anymore. What kind of process are you suggesting for them to decide on what is that next step? Is it investment into tech? What does that kind of
Yeah, I mean,
evaluation process
usually
look
there's
like?
a tech component when people are thinking about scaling their business. So I would normally start with what they currently have and we'd evaluate what is not working for them. So a lot of times people, I've had business owners say, "Oh, I want to switch to this other CRM." And I say, "Why?" And they don't have answers to those questions. So I never would just switch to a CRM just because it was the new shiny thing out there that somebody told me that, was the latest and greatest. You really have to evaluate what is not working for you with your current tech stack, whatever you have, and what do you want to do differently? Because if you don't answer those questions, then you'll just make decisions that aren't going to serve your business and just cause more problems in the future. So just make sure you're really clear about your current tech stack and what it's offering for you and what it doesn't offer and what you would like to see differently before you make any of those decisions. And sometimes there's a little bit of trial and error. You just gotta, try out a tool and you
Yes.
plug it in, try to integrate them as much as possible. I always say that, try to integrate your tools. But sometimes you have to try it and you go, "Oh, this didn't work. This is not what I thought it was being. It didn't solve the problem that I thought it was going to solve." So unfortunately, there is some trial and error.
Yeah, because oftentimes when you're switching, you don't know what you don't know when it terms of asking things. So although you may have been very thorough in asking a lot of things, does it do this? Yes, 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 yes. We ran into one recently. Someone was integrating a system, and it was very like connected with their QuickBooks accounts. This is where we kind of tied in, and there was a question. Now, no one had thought to ask a very specific question about the way that their calendar worked, because everyone assumed that of course it did this because every other software on the market did it one way. And so, it never even, and so it wasn't until they were very far down the path, like implementation, that and they had tested and they'd done all these things, been very thorough. And it wasn't until they were like, "Hey, well, but what about this?" And the software company was like, "Oh, it doesn't do that." And everyone's like, "Well, what do you mean it doesn't do that? Everybody does that." And they were like, "Well, we
Wow.
don't." And they were like, and it was like this piece, and so now, I mean, not that it
Mhm,
couldn't be reworked to avoid that. Of course, you have people in the organization that are like, "Well, it has to. Like, this is not going to work." And you take a step
mhm.
back and you say, "Well, why does it have to?" And we obviously, this software is used for, you know, lots of other companies that are not using that feature because it doesn't have that feature. So how are they doing it? And maybe, but there was a lot of stress in that moment, because you have your
Yeah.
anti-change people always who are like, "No, no, it has to. Like, this isn't going to work." And it all worked out and everything has been fine. But no one thought to ask if it did that, because it was just assumed. And then it starts the whole, okay, well, now on the fly we have to change that, kind of put some time to solving that problem we
Yeah.
didn't actually know we
That is
had
a
to
big
solve yet.
bummer when that happens, but you can only do so much. Like you said, you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you're gonna have those situations, which are unfortunate. Hopefully, they're few and far between.
So as a business grows, and kind of talking about the people element of change, there's, as your team grows and whatnot, making any kind of operational change has just more players involved, whether that is more people in the field, more people. And so, how do you help a business owner navigate if there's people on their team that are really leaning into anti-change? They like how it's been done. It's the group that says we've always done it that way. Um, how do you help people
Well,
navigate
there's
that?
typically, that's a culture thing sometimes. Well, there's some coaching that goes along with those conversations, and you know, you hope that they are can come around and be on the same page as the business owner. Sometimes they can't and don't want to, and so maybe you just have to make a decision about them whether they're the best person for your next evolution. Sometimes you have team members that were the right team member up until that point, and maybe they're not the right team member moving forward for the next stage or phase of growth. So a lot of it's a conversation with the business owner, with the team member, and there's a lot of times that there's things underneath that you have to get to that they're,
Hmm.
resistant for other reasons that they're not sharing initially. So I do try to dig underneath and
Right.
find the real why of their resistance to help them, overcome that if they can, and help the business owner make sometimes challenging decisions about moving forward without them. Yeah. So it's different, obviously, for each company and each business owner.
Absolutely. I think that though the people are often in any change in a business, there's
Hmm.
always personalities at play, people who've been there for a long time, or, sometimes someone is a part of maybe the team that's really focusing on that change, but really perhaps someone else actually has more experience, and so they're feeling like, "Hey, I have something to offer. Why am I not being included in some of those things?" So I think that, yeah, I mean, tech can always offer its challenges, but I feel like making sure that the people, are supported through the change is actually the
Yeah.
much tougher part of
And I
your
really
your
started
role for
getting
sure.
into using assessment tools to help business owners build their team out because I found them to not be woo woo. Like, I was using, DISC, which is a
Mhm.
main assessment tool for understanding the way that you operate in the world, and you can even look at, Myers-Briggs, and there's some other, Clifton, Strengths is another one. So there's a few that you can pull in and really help you see, if your team is, I would say, what's the right word? Balanced. You don't wanna have all like, if you're looking at
Mhm.
DISC, which is, Ds are very strong personalities. It's DISC in the DISC world. You might not wanna have a full team worth of Ds because then everybody wants to do things their own way. And so it has come into play, and I've used this
Mhm.
when I was working in tech startups. Companies used evaluation tools like this to see if their team members were a good fit, and I worked with a leadership development and team building coach, a long time ago, and so he really got me. I learned a lot from him about how to use these tools in a business to make sure that they could actually, be supportive and help them make decisions about team members. So I would say don't shy away from if people are resistant to using these kinds of assessment tools because they think that they're woo woo or not based on science, they actually are. And I found them to be very helpful in helping business owners build teams and
Yes.
and maintain teams that are a good fit and good for their next evolution of growth.
Yeah, I think, whatever kind of tool that people are using like that, I find that it's if you're going to take it and implement change, a lot of people ask, and it comes back to a question of like, how much detail do my reports need to have? How many assessments should I do? All of these types of things. And for me, it always comes back to what are you going to use like to action it? So when you're saying, hey, we're going to take these assessments and then we're going to, make sure that the team, like the action from that then is to then make sure the team is balanced to cover all of these pieces. You also see a lot of people kind of leaning into, "Hey, let's do these." Like, you see so many people talking about, their results of different things, and there like you said, there's so many different variations out there. But then it kinda stops there, and so someone's made the investment into, doing something like this and the time of having people do them, but then it's the actual action and follow through that is a bit of a struggle sometimes, or they've identified, "Hey, this isn't really balanced, but there's nothing really I can do about
Yeah,
it,"
and
and
I
then it
think it
kinda
gives
dies
them a
there.
common language too, like, if you talk about DISC again, I keep referring back to that one because it's a popular one. It helps them understand you can actually use language like, "Oh," you say, "I was just being an I." That was me just being an and so it kinda takes pressure off and you can kinda joke about it like, "I'm an ass." It's not about not taking ownership, but I think people have a common language so they recognize that a D is gonna act, some more often than not act certain ways. I's act certain, everybody has the ways that they show up in the world, and just being able to own that and have a conversation about that and knowledge and understanding like, "Oh, maybe they were just being an S in that moment," or not that it has to be a bad thing. They are all positive things as well, but I
Right.
think it does help them just understand each other a little bit better in a team dynamic, which can be challenging, and it could be hard to navigate difficult situations. If you're not using them, like you said, you have all these tools, and then you have to have somebody that's helping them use them, maybe not day to day, but on a regular basis in the business to make sure that it, is worth their time and investment, yeah.
Yeah, last season, we had someone on the podcast, and he's very a part of not now, but was a part of kind of
Mm,
the Disney customer service experience, and I always found it to be such a kind of mystery because you have such a large group of people that all operate the exact same way, like Disney people don't point with one finger, and for me, I was like, this to me is having, being
Mm.
able to teach a group of people to effectively do the same thing, whether a leader is standing there, whether it's not, whether it's, and I'm like, that is kind of to me like the ultra in business is being able to have a group of team members that all respond, the way that you would want them to, like based on kind of the training and guidance, the same way all the time, whether someone's paying attention or not. And so, that really leans into, being able to effectively take whatever
Mhm.
they've decided is important. At one point, someone in Disney decided we don't point with one finger is, one example. And so, it's a great thing to be able to affect people in that way. And so when you're talking about, hey, being able to kind of almost say like, hey, I was acting this way or whatnot. But to the same effect as a leader, not being surprised when, someone to be one way and then you're just like, well, they didn't do this over here, which was and you're like, well, of course they didn't. That's not who they are. Right. And so, really using it to know your people and there's kind of that business deliverable of, hey, we really want people to do all of this, but realizing and recognizing that all the inputs are very unique people. And so to get the output to be the same based on all of those unique pieces
Yeah.
is a
I think
challenge that
really
takes
a good
time.
leadership, really a good leader really takes the time to understand their team members' unique skills and gifts and if you find the
Mhm.
right person, like if you know that they're a great personality and they're totally in alignment with your vision and they want to help you succeed, then it's helpful to build positions around those people if they're just rock stars. But, eventually they would get burnt out potentially and leave if they weren't doing the work that they were aligned with or passionate about doing. So they sometimes you have to say, "Can you do this for a period of time because I just really need it to get done?" But over time, have to make
Yes.
sure that you can align them with what they're best at. Otherwise, you'll have attrition and turnover, and that's a common thing that happens for sure in businesses.
Yes, absolutely. What would you say, if you're looking at operations, you've been doing this a long time, what are some of the most common things, the mistakes that get made along the way? If you had to break it down to like, what are 5 things that were perhaps red flags that business owners just look past
Well,
commonly?
that's I built my framework around, and there's 7 actually. I really mentioned, I've
Okay, yeah.
mentioned them already, but I would say the first one is just to evaluate where you're at in your business and make sure that you have all of the things in place that you need to get to that next level. And a lot of times people don't know what that is, and so you might have to hire somebody to help you figure that out. But just making sure you have the financial systems in place, the legal systems in place, strategic planning in place with measuring, whether if you just have a strategic plan and you don't measure your success, you don't know that you've succeeded. Right. So if you're like, just want to generate more
Mhm.
revenue, well, you need to have a goal in place for that. Or if I just want to get more clients, well, how many more clients? So that you having it be measurable is important. Making sure you have all of the tools, the tech stack in place to support your growth and expansion. Making sure you have the team in place, and then making sure that you're taking care of yourself as a business owner, because that's an important thing that happens a lot. Like business owners they either burn out physically where they actually get sick, or they just get burnt out on what they're doing. And like that's so sad. You work so hard to build this business so you can have all this freedom and flexibility, and then they start resenting their business because they're doing work that they just don't want to be doing. I would say those are really the 7 things that I would be looking at. That are the 7 biggest mistakes. Business owners will either overlook one or more or all of them when they're, running their business, especially when they're scaling. It's important to look at all of that stuff.
It comes back to that comment that you just made though of I need you to
Mhm.
do this for a little while because I just need to get it done. But I think that also applies equally to the business owner that we don't really, the founder doesn't consult with the founder. And there are
Mhm.
things that I need you to do this for a while and because I need it to get done. And we're not at the point where we can hire someone to do it yet. Or, it's like, hey, this came up and it was unexpected and we just have to, dig in and do it. But where that gets to that burnout is when that becomes too long and we're not really checking in and saying like, hey, this, I didn't know it was a problem at all. Then it became a problem we must deal with today. And it's going to be a month. And then it's like, well, the month becomes 3 months, becomes 5 months. And before you know it, it's like, oh my goodness, it's turned everything else upside down because we've ignored all these other things while we dealt with this
Yeah.
problem that
And
just
it's not
wouldn't go away.
easy. You're trying to run a business. It takes a lot of time and effort and energy. And most business owners don't have a lot of that extra time sitting around to have these thoughts or to dive into their business this way and to analyze it in this way. So it's not easy. And being an entrepreneur is not easy, for sure.
Yes. My husband also is in business leadership. We actually worked together before, and he is still where I left, and then I started my business. And we get chatting. It was on the weekend, and because he's not a part of really what's going on in my business, and so he answered questions. His feedback
Yeah.
is what I would give someone else, right? And when you hear
Huh?
your own words, but coming from someone else, and he's like, well,
Right.
what did the numbers say? What did the report? And I said, no, but you don't understand. Like, there's these other,
Okay.
and I was like, oh my, it was such a weird dynamic because I
Yeah.
knew everything he was saying was correct, 100%. But in that moment, I was like, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
You're
No,
right.
I've had
Never
that.
mind.
I
And
was
it
just gonna
was
say
like
I've had
that.
that same challenge with operations. Like I have to hire people outside of my business to actually give me advice as well about my business.
Because
Yeah.
it's hard when you're in it. It's very different to be in it and you see every little, like I always call them like the nuts and the bolts, instead of being able to look at that bigger picture, because some detail will pull you down into the like, oh, well, but what about this? Or like, and so sometimes there really is such value in being able to step into that 30,000-foot view and say, okay, forget the details. What should it really
Yeah.
be and how can we get it to
Perspective.
there? And so
Yeah.
that's
Perspective
such a
there is
different
key. Yeah.
perspective. Absolutely. So if you had to give one tangible tip to a business owner that has maybe listened to the episode and is like, yes, turns out I have an operational challenge, and what is that tangible tip that they can implement right away?
Boy, I'm trying to think what I haven't already shared. Probably finding somebody that can help you, like we were just saying, getting the perspective, getting the outsider's view of where your business is at and where you're going to go or where you want to go, and identifying those gaps that are going to prevent you from getting there. I think that's probably a big one, is because awareness, you said it earlier, awareness and knowledge is power. Like understanding where you are and where you want to go and how you're going to get there is probably, the first step. Yeah. In success. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if someone wants to get more information about your different, audits and evaluations and how perhaps they could work with you, get some more information, what part of the
I have a
internet do you like to
website,
hang
which is
out in?
soultreeops.com, soultreeops.com, and Lisi, Lisi at soultreeops.com is my email. I'm there. I'm also on LinkedIn, which is just Lisi Kempton, Lisikempton. You can see it in my name there. I'm on Facebook a little bit, but mostly, LinkedIn and YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, Mindful Business Expansion. Now I can't actually remember what the handle is.
Be sure to tag it. I'll tag it in the show notes and the episode description as well,
I
so
do
people
share a lot of
can link
videos
over
and
to you.
tips and stuff on there. So
Fantastic. I think, yeah, like I said, at the very beginning, I think anyone who doesn't necessarily think they have an ops challenge or know just how powerful it can be, it really is, that is maybe the best place to start, is just the awareness of what are the opportunities, and maybe jump in on some of your content, because it really is, that kind of the glue that can take a great idea and a business that's gotten started and is really taking roots and make it just absolutely more powerful, drive that success, and make
yes.
the success feel better. Because
Mm.
there's a lot of business out there that can be successful, but it is a battle every step of the way and lead to burnout and all sorts of things. And so, really improving the
Yeah.
operations
We want to try
can
to
be
have
so
fun
powerful.
at the same time that we're making money and having an impact, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here.
That's all the time we have for today, but the conversation doesn't stop here. Be sure to subscribe to the Service-Based Business Society podcast on all of your favorite apps. And if you're hanging out over on YouTube, search for Tiffany-Ann Bottcher. Your likes, comments, and shares don't just help the show, they help more entrepreneurs find the real stories and strategies that they need to scale. Until next time, keep pushing, keep building, and I'll catch you in the next episode.